Well, if you're a Blue Jay fan, it's pretty exciting times. They came back, they blew an 8-run lead late yesterday, and the New York Yankees, of course, visiting, who they're now tied in first place with. The Yankees stormed back, but could not pull it off. The Blue Jays managed to regain themselves, recoup, and won the game, and now tied for first place in the American League East in July 7th, and that's pretty noteworthy, considering the fact that a lot of people had written the Blue Jays off earlier in the season when they didn't look very good, that's for sure, but it just goes to show anything can happen in sports, folks. And my New York Yankees, I'm wearing my Yankees hoodie today because I'm keeping the faith that the Yankees will indeed pull it together and win today, because the Blue Jays can sweep the New York Yankees. Unbelievable. Anyway, exciting stuff. Good for Blue Jays, good for Canadian baseball, good for Rogers, of course, who owns this radio station and, of course, owns the Blue Jays, and good for Sportsnet. But despite all of that kind of built-in patriotism, I'm going for the Yankees, and I will always go for my New York Yankees. Pretty exciting times, though, when it comes to baseball. Baseball's a great sport. I love it, and I've always said, as long as my team's in it, as long as the Yankees are kind of in the hunt throughout the season, that's all you can ask for, really, just to kind of keep you excited and keep you involved. But the American League East is tightening up. Tampa Bay's good. The Red Sox, they're kind of hanging around. Nobody's running away with the American League East right now. Anyway, Jays fans, good for you, but I don't like it at all. Anyway. Look, folks, the cost of living, the share of income Halifax households typically spent on housing and transportation costs in 2024 was comparable to cities like Toronto, according to recent Stats Canada data analyzed by CBC News. I saw this on the CBC website this morning. Half of households in Halifax are estimated to spend about 31% or more of before-tax income of those two expense categories. In Toronto, the figure was 30%. So who would have thought that it costs relatively the same to live in Halifax as it does in Toronto? And I also saw a release from the Fraser Institute this morning, and I'm going to chat with the Fraser Institute tomorrow about this. At $50,000 of income, taxpayers in this province face the highest marginal provincial income tax rates in Canada, finds a new study published by the Fraser Institute. Specifically, at $50,000 of income, Nova Scotia has the highest provincial income tax at almost 15%. The next dollar earned far higher than Ontario at 5.05%, Alberta 8%, which have the lowest rates in the country at that income levels. And the reason why I bring this up is because, look, we have often thought of Nova Scotia as being an affordable place to live, and for many decades it certainly was. And wages were notoriously low in this region, but that was kind of the sales pitch, right? That you can buy a home for much less than you can in places like Ontario, or certainly Toronto or Vancouver, or any of those jurisdictions. But things have changed mightily, folks, and incomes have not moved. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to weigh in on when we open the phone lines in about an hour's time is this province of Nova Scotia simply overpriced as a result of taxation, housing, food, transportation, power rates, etc. And what can you do about it? And for people with opportunities and mobility, what will keep them here and attract them here? And have you considered leaving this province just simply out of, in some cases, necessity and desperation when it comes to cost of living, folks? When all is said and done, it's nice to live somewhere, but you have to be able to put food on the table and have some quality of life. Otherwise, people will move on. So that is one of the things that I'm going to ask you about when we open the phone lines, as mentioned, between 11 and 12, and lots of other things to get to as well that I have in the pile. Thanks for tuning in and listening. We appreciate it very much. I'd like to thank Vanessa Van Ness on the other side of the glass at the control boards, doing a fine job as always. All right, let's dive into our first guest, Robert Huish, Dalhousie University Associate Professor, Department of International Development Studies. Robert, thanks for joining me here in studio. Appreciate it, of course.
Good to see you, Todd.
All right, so lots to talk about. Ongoing negotiations when it comes to the U.S. and Canada and trade, and the digital sales tax, services tax rather, did not last long, right? That was an easy sacrificial lamb, wasn't it?
Oh, big time. So this was a idea proposed under Justin Trudeau's government, putting it forward to basically say that any foreign company that's using Canadian data would be taxed. So that if, we've seen there's the tensions in this in the past, that with the social media platforms and with mainstream news media in Canada, right? The issue there about being banned on certain platforms because of taxation requests, that business. So it was there. It was seen by the Trudeau government as a response to what some major media chains were doing, massive layoffs, certainly with the Bell and CTV crowd. And this is supposed to be a way of getting money back in the coffers to try to support Canadian industry. However, as we know, that a lot of issues when it comes to taxation in this regard rarely deliver the goods down the road. So this is a very easy one for Prime Minister Carney to get rid of, and for two ways. I mean, one is the old adage that, that old anecdote from the Soviet Union era where this, is a transition in leadership. The guy's on the way out and the new one's coming in, and he says, here's two letters. And if you ever get in a bad way, open the first letter. And then if you ever get in a bad way, you can open the second letter. And the first one, he opens up, he's in a mess, and he opens it up and it says, just blame everything on me. Yeah. Right? And so that's great. And then eventually down the road, he opens the second letter, it says, sit down, write two letters.
Yeah, that's right.
But this is still something that Mr. Carney can do, is take some deficient policies from the Trudeau government and get rid of them. Or just say, yes, there's a regime change here and it's a different day. Very easy politically, because the Conservatives are not going to come back and say, yes, we want that tax. Right? They're not really a party that requests for more taxation. But besides that, there's something bigger here where it's not really seen as a defeat of Canada by U.S. pressure in any way. I do think there is a bigger negotiation strategy here. And with the pressure that big data companies, your Metas and your others, Google, whoever, Apple, if they are seeking Canadian data, right, to tax it like a sales tax or a consumption tax isn't the way to do it. We need to see that, yes, there's 40 million people in Canada. Mm-hmm. The data is very valuable to many companies. Could we treat it like a royalty? And that's what you see with other resources that have been, taking place in the past with mining, oil and gas, even lumber. What the province of Alberta does with their heritage fund, Norway does that, where, if you want those resources, it's going to have a royalty attached to it. It doesn't necessarily have to go into government. It can go into a public trust, as we've seen in other jurisdictions. So I think Mr. Carney's goal here is to try to make sure that Canada doesn't get designed by data, that we still have the role to develop data and have some control over it. Because right now, we give away a lot of our data for free, a lot of our personal information. We get an app on the phone. There's the 32 pages of text to say, are you agreeing to the terms and conditions? Yes, boom, on it goes. And we have no real control over it. So I think the long-term vision that Mr. Carney has is to try to get some better control nationally of it. How it plays out, still questionable.
Well, does he have a long-term vision, though, or is this kind of ad hoc?
No, I think that if you take a read of his book, Values, there is a big case being made there to say that the Canadian economy is going to have to modernize to develop its own unique strategy, both geopolitically, but also to get better control over technology. And if it's data right now, it could be AI tomorrow. And not necessarily from the production of it, but the control of it and making sure that we don't just give all this stuff away, because these the mega billionaires in the States who Trump is surrounded by, that's where they're ultimately getting their main resource from, is from personal data, using that, analyzing it, processing it, running it through AI algorithms. That's the value. So if we're just letting it being fleeced away, that is going to be an infringement on Canadian sovereignty down the road.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the adage, a rose is a rose by any other name, right? A tax is a tax, and call it a royalty or whatever. It's still, for all intents and purposes, a tax is a royalty, is it not?
Well, if you're asking someone to pay for a fee to use a service, it could be. But beyond semantics, the idea of a tax is actually to try to change and adjust behavior, right? Tax schemes for businesses and corporations are done to either encourage investment or to discourage it, and for our own consumption taxes, right? If it's on goods and services, you're trying to get revenue into the public coffers. If it's on alcohol, tobacco, you're trying to discourage consumption of it. So that's the beautiful part about taxation is it's really, really complicated because you put the tax in, you try to change human behavior, and then you see what the results are. And rarely does it ever add up. There's usually some departures along the way. So if there's, some way to make sure that we're not just giving the whole show over, especially if we look at data as a resource rather than a consumed good, that could be an interesting conversation because there's other resources around the world that they've made that happen with.
All right, it sounds quite nuanced to me, and I'm not sure that Donald Trump is a nuanced thinker.
I've never seen him be nuanced. Thinking is another question.
That's right. So that's the point, right? I mean, it seems like a bit of a tough sell to me.
Yeah, and I think if the negotiations with Trump, if he focuses on a bump in the road like this, like for example with supply management, he's just obsessed with this idea that there's a 287% tariff on U.S. dairy coming into the country. And that's sort of a overgeneralization of how supply management works, right? There is U.S. dairy that comes in. It's usually about 3% of our total consumption, usually in the form of sugar, butter, oil, which is what we use for ice cream. But it's not just that quick and dirty. But Trump sees these issues of say supply management versus a tariff or taxation versus royalties. He sees it as just one issue, and as long as that's on his radar, then the obsession grows. So again, it's now instinctive. Every time that you mention Canada to Trump, he'll be quick to say 51st state at some point. And I think Mr. Carney and his team have to realize that if you put little bumps in the road that Trump can obsess on, he will. But if you're able to sort of mask it under and sort of show where those combined interests are for regional or regional economic development or even regional security, that might calm him down a little bit. But that's a heavy might.
Okay, so there's some self-imposed deadline. I think it's July 21st, and to get a deal done. Seems like a lot of heavy thinking and a lot of deep thinking, but to expect Trump to suddenly manufacture between now and then. What are your thoughts?
So I think what we've seen so far, we look at the deals, the beautiful deals, quote unquote, with China and the United Kingdom. Both of those countries didn't really have to do a whole lot before Trump capitulated down and struck a deal. And that seems to be generally how he's governing. He takes things to complete extremes, pushes the limit, and then in that sort of feeling of tension and chaos, then backs down at the last minute. Now, in the end, there's still a lot of pressure by automakers, by the steel industry, to say that if you start tariffing Canadian goods to the point of 50%, there's no way that the automakers are going to be able to pivot that quickly on the U.S. side to do it. Things like dairy, things like softwood, those are decades long. Actually, softwood's like 200 years long. Yeah. So I'm not seeing those issues being resolved. But for any other industry where there is that dependency and that reliance, that'll probably back down, but not before doing a lot of insulting maneuvers and getting the bluster up. Don't forget that 38 states in the United States, their biggest trading partner is Canada. Mm-hmm. Of 50 states, 38 of them, we are the prime market for it. So that's a huge thing to consider. And I know we've had delegations of political leaders and business community members from New England who've been visiting Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in the past little while, and that seems to be really strong. That at the state level, there is that recognition that trade matters, and we just can't cut things up or just start putting economic walls up. It would devastate workers in Kentucky and Maine as much as it would our local economy here.
Okay, so those people who hear Trump saying, we don't need Canada, we don't need anything you've got, we don't need your energy, we don't need your auto, we don't need your software, we don't need anything that you have. What's your response to that?
It's total geographic ignorance on Trump's part. Let's start with security. The U.S. military itself says that we need Canada as an ally, as someone who's able to do the monitoring of data signals, northern defense. Mm-hmm. We're very much part of the U.S. security's interest in that way. That's the one thing. And secondly, there's a lot of resources that are just readily available neighbor to neighbor between Canada and the U.S. That's in the U.S. interest to purchase. Fertilizer from Saskatchewan is top of that list. They're hungry for fertilizer. And despite the war in Ukraine and despite the tariffs or sanctions, I should say, the U.S. imported loads of fertilizer from Russia last year. So why are we seeing Washington keeping the trade door open with Russian fertilizer when you've got as much fertilizer and potash as you need coming out of Saskatchewan? So that's a huge thing. There is just too much connectivity, both on a business sense and interpersonally, for Canadians and Americans to just sort of put that wall up forever and say, fare thee well. We are going to be forced by geography to work with each other. And if it's what I've never understood with Trump's rhetoric is that on one hand he says we don't need Canada, and within the same breath he says, but it'd be beautiful if you were a 51st state. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. Right. I don't even know how that thought process works. Yeah. And in terms of what Canada provides is a very efficient trading partner and security buffer that the U.S. has come to rely on and depend on. And I think that's what we got to recognize, that relationship is fractured, it's hurt, but it's nowhere near dead.
Okay, I saw a story this morning. Former Liberal Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy is accusing Prime Minister Carney of taking a bootlicking approach to U.S. President Donald Trump at the expense of Canadian values. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it obligatory to perhaps be perceived as bootlicking, or what's the deal with? What are your thoughts on that type of comment? Yeah,
I think that's a bit harsh for Mr. Axworthy to drop, because right now you're seeing such a divide in values. Like, look at just what's going on with the ICE raids in the States. We wouldn't come near that in Canada or expect any sort of that behavior here. There's, he's now praising this, what is it called? Alligator Alcatraz? Yeah. So we're not doing that kind of stuff. We're never going to conform to those sort of actions here. But in terms of trying to make sure that you are negotiating and talking and engaging through diplomacy, sometimes it means that you have to hear some abusive language, but it doesn't mean that you have to accept it, and nor does it mean that you have to kowtow to it. Right. And I don't see anything so far really compromising Canada's values. Like, our core institutions are not being brought into these discussions. If it's public health care, public education, firearms safety, these are three things that are just tremendously lacking in the United States, and I don't see any compromising on the Canadian side for that so far. But again, a lot of provincial jurisdictions in there too. So I think what Mr. Axworthy probably wants to see is a bit more aggression by Canada against the U.S. But there's a way of being tough, and there's a way of just being belligerent, and I think we're still walking that line of defending our interests without just throwing needless attacks around.
Okay, lastly, are you optimistic that we'll get a deal done by this self-imposed deadline?
Probably something will be brought forward. Will it be a glorious thing for all sides? Probably not. Mm-hmm. It's probably something where, in order to get a deal done, again, the old adage is that both sides have to lose something in return.
Sure.
And I think that's the real question, is that what will the Americans under Mr. Trump currently have to feel that he can lose effectively to satisfy our interests on this side. I'm not sure what that's going to be. It could be in all sorts of different directions. It could be a key industry. It could be a border agreement. I have no idea. But we're probably going to see something agreed, and probably a lot of hurt feelings between now and then.
Okay, Robert. Always great. Thanks for coming in, my friend.
Thanks, Todd.
All right, Robert Huish, Dalhousie University Associate Professor, Department of International Development Studies. The Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service is reporting the first potential instance this season of a potential shark forcing swimmers from the water. That when we come back. The Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service reporting the first potential instance this season of a potential shark forcing swimmers from the water. Paul Dion, director of the service, says a fin was spotted at one side of the swimmers area of Queensland Beach, about 50 kilometers west of Halifax yesterday. Happened at 11:20. Joining us to talk about all this is Paul Dion. Paul, thanks for joining the show.
You're welcome.
All right, so tell us about this instance and what happened.
I received a call around 11:25 from one of the lifeguards, excuse me, and they told me that there was a fin sighting approximately halfway out to the left-hand buoy in our supervised swim area, and that they instituted our protocol for fin sighting, which is essentially we close down for 2 hours, clear the water, and close down for 2 hours and keep an eye on things.
All right. How common or not is this?
We get 3 to 4 sightings per summer. We supervise 21 ocean beaches around the province, and we might get 3 or 4 fin sightings.
Okay, so what was the reaction?
Well, mixed reaction. Certainly the people at the beach appreciated the work that the lifeguards do. There were a few people that were upset, but our job is intervention and keep the patrons safe, and if we're going to err, we err on the side of safety.
Okay, how long after a fin sighting can people go back in the water?
Our protocol is 2 hours, and our guards constantly watch the water, and if they don't see any additional fin sightings, then we allow people back in. And that's quite common around the world for lifeguard supervised beaches. We picked that essentially that protocol was picked up from looking at a number of protocols from other lifeguard services.
All right, so obviously you don't want panic to set in, but you want people to be vigilant. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, extremely low risk of encountering any type of shark or other wildlife. We don't like saying the S word, but I will use it. There's never. We've been open 53 years. We've never had an incident at any of our supervised beaches. And my story is it's way more dangerous to drive to the beach than it is while you're at the beach for, risk of harm to yourself. So the risk is there, but it's extremely low.
Okay, so any particular time of the day or what are if there were going to be a shark in the area, is there a potential time that might be more realistic for that happening?
Yeah, the shark experts tell me their feeding time is usually early morning and late evening, dawn and dusk, and that's in other areas that they have signage advising people not to swim at those times. So that's typically when sharks feed the most. And they feed on things like seals, and they may be chasing mackerels into St. Margaret's Bay, who knows, right?
All right, so there's speculation perhaps that warmer waters or reasons why more sharks might be sighted. First of all, is there empirical data which would back that up, that there are more sharks?
Some people would say yes to that question. I'm certainly not a shark expert, but I certainly have read a lot about it. And I can tell you in 1978, when I was a beach captain at Ingonish Beach, they caught 2 whites off the 400 meters off the coast. One shark expert, tells me there's sharks out there. They come up and they migrate north in this time of year, and then in the fall they head back to their warmer waters in the Caribbean and other areas. So, is there more? The shark experts are a bit divided on that, but there's not as much fishing and harvesting of sharks, so there may be slightly more.
Okay, email question from Jonathan says, how do you determine if it's a shark fin or a sunfish fin?
Well, I tell people these sharks, when they swim in, they're not labeled, so we don't know. Sometimes we can grab a video and send it to people that do know how to identify them. Sunfishes tend to flop over rather than swim fast through the water. But as I said, we see the fin, we're not sure, we're going to call it. So.
Okay, Paul, appreciate it. Thanks for doing this.
Anytime, Todd.
All right, take care. Paul Dion, Director, Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service. I saw an interesting op-ed earlier in the week on being Canadian, why we're different, written by Colin Robertson, who's been a regular guest on the show. Colin joins us when we come back. Colin Robertson joins the show, former career diplomat, fellow and host of the Global Exchange podcast of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Ottawa. Colin, thanks for joining the show. As always, we appreciate your time.
Always good to be with you, Todd.
All right, so I read your op-ed or column on being Canadian, why we're different. And this was penned, obviously, with Canada Day in mind, which was this week, correct?
Correct. It was part of a series that Policy Magazine had asked a number of the contributors to make a contribution to, and that was my contribution.
All right. Well, it was very interesting read, by the way, and lots to do unpackage here. So what are some of your key points that you were making here? Because, again, there's a lot of them.
Well, I guess my bottom line was that to be sort of born Canadian or to migrate to Canada and become Canadian is to win the global lottery. And I think that we are a good and lucky country. Yes, we have flaws, but essentially we have made against the compromising with geography, with climate, with diversity. We've actually got something that's quite special. And you appreciate this most when you're out of the country and then when you come back to it. And I spent half my career overseas, and I found that there are really 4 lines in the world for people who want to go to other countries, and they're to the United States, to Canada, to Australia, and New Zealand. But the lines for Canada were always filled with people who thought that this was a place where they could get a second chance, and that they liked the country and what they had read about it. Our brand is actually much better abroad than it is often at home, where I sometimes think in the last decade we got sometimes sidetracked and focusing on what things that we could have done better as a country and citizens, but nonetheless, there's still so much to be proud of in Canada, and we still integrate so many people into this country, and it actually works extremely well. It's not the United States. We're not anti-American, but we are un-American, and that was part of what I was trying to point out, that the people that came here often came from, as historian Des Morton said to me, we were in a sense the losers, the French Canadians who lost to the British, and then the British who came up from the United States, and then the waves of people who came from both across the Atlantic and across the Pacific, who, again, for whatever reason, weren't making it their own homeland and wanted to flee oppression or famine or conflict and came to Canada. And we've actually done something in Canada that really works. The Aga Khan set up his Centre for Pluralism. He looked around the world and said, what country does it best? And he said that it was Canada. And you realize that 1 in 5 Canadians was born abroad. In our big cities, Toronto, more than half the people were born outside of Canada, yet it still works pretty well.
Yeah, and you write about the Canadian experience and the inherent challenges, I suppose, of being next to the United States and potentially being dwarfed by the United States, but not, for whatever reason, not succumbing to that over the decades, right? No,
that's exactly right. We've maintained our identity. It's sometimes harder. We in Mexico, Mexico lost a third of its country. We lost bits and pieces to the United States. I think the Mexicans have a bigger chip on their shoulder vis-a-vis the United States for good reason. But we've managed to make peace with the United States, and they are, in most times, our friend, our ally, and neighbor, and our biggest trading partner. But we are different from them. They put the emphasis on the melting pot. We're much more the mosaic. As I said, we're like threads in a kilt, so that we do things differently. I think we're much better because of our heritage, because we've had to cope with climate and geography, better at compromise and trying to find consensus. As an American ambassador once said to me, in the United States we go from A to Z, or we'd say Z. You in Canada go from F to M, and I think that's probably right. We tend to huddle closer to the center, and I think that makes it easier for the country to work. Again, not perfect, but we deal with the challenges as we see them and get on with life.
Yeah, you also write about John A. Macdonald and his role in all of this, which I thought was interesting. And, of course, John A. Macdonald and some of these early Canadians, founding fathers, I guess, if you will, have with residential schools and other kind of warts in their history. I think we can forget some of the pivotal key roles that some of these people had, like John A. Macdonald.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that what we fall into the trap of applying today's moral standards to what happened a century ago, and I think that's not a good way to look at history. I think you can learn from the past, but don't apply the lessons of the present to the past because it was entirely different conditions. And in the case of Sir John A. Macdonald, we wouldn't be. As I had a long conversation with Richard Gwynne, late Richard Gwynne, who wrote a superb 2-volume history of the man who made us, Macdonald, who was resolutely Canadian, and his challenge was as much the British, because the British, I think, would have been prepared to sacrifice us to the United States for good relations, as he was anti-American in a sense. He did not want to become part of the United States, and he also had the vision of big projects, that we could do bigger things than what seemed possible. So building the Trans-Pacific Railway in the last spike, which is part of our, really brought the country together from coast to coast, that was an epic endeavor, but we succeeded, and against the odds. And I think that that's part of what Canada is about, and I think that we're looking again at big nation-building projects, and there's lots of reasons why we can't do them, but we should do them.
Colin, are you still there? I think we lost Colin. All right, let's try and get Colin back on the line. Interesting chat for sure. And yeah, John A. Macdonald, as he wrote about in the piece, and I'll read a bit of it, says Canada exists because the resolutely Canadian Sir John A. Macdonald was determined to avoid the American embrace. So convincingly argued the late journalist and historian Richard Gwynne, which he mentioned. One afternoon in my backyard reading his piece now. In his splendid biography of the man who made us, Gwynne says Macdonald was determined that Canada would remain un-American. The Confederation of British North America was partly a reaction to the recognition that annexation into the Great Republic was the clear and present danger. Macdonald's conviction drove the construction of the coast-to-coast railway and the formulation of the national policy. The piece goes on to say Gwynne's thesis jibed with what another historian, W.L. Bill Morton, taught me at the university in a series of lectures published, The Canadian Identity. Morton argues that we have constructed the greatest of civilizations in the grimmest of environments and elaborated in one of the largest, harshest, and most intimidating countries on earth. He goes on to say, if the American experience relies on shared history and belief in the melting pot of being American, the Canadian experience is less straightforward. There has always been more division and ambiguity about our shared history and less exuberance to our nationalism. It was not as if our founding nation set out to create a Canada in opposition to colonial status quo. So, and nonetheless, I think that perhaps our connection with Colin Robertson is gone. I'm not sure what happened, but nonetheless, interesting chat, and we thank Colin Robertson for his participation in the show. And again, a regular on the show, former career diplomat, fellow, and the host of the Global Exchange podcast with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Ottawa. And the piece which I mentioned on being Canadian, why we are different. All right, 40 years since the first cell phone call made in this country. We'll talk about this with the Senior Vice President of the Canadian Telecommunications Association when we come back. All right, saw this story on our website. From bulky car phones to pocket computer cell phones, mark 40 years in Canada. Joining us to discuss this is Eric Smith, Senior Vice President of the Canadian Telecommunications Association. Eric, thanks for joining the show.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
All right, so it is quite an evolution in 40 years when you think about that first bulky cell phone to what we now have today. It's just mind-boggling, isn't it?
It certainly is. I mean, it's kind of easy to take for granted what we have today. I guess somewhat like electricity, we just assume it's going to be there. And the same is true for our mobile devices. Most people go everywhere with them. 40 years ago, you had a bulky device, as you mentioned, and it was only capable of making mobile phone calls in a very select number of cities in Canada. Basically, it started out, Montreal, Toronto. now you have a device that is not just making phone calls, you're streaming videos, you're surfing the net, it's your GPS, it's your camera, it's your entertainment hub, it's your office, it's your wallet, and it's your lifeline in times of emergency. So we've really come a long way.
Yeah, with that, though, a reliance on the technology leaves us vulnerable to the technology as well. That's another component to the story. What are your thoughts?
Well, that is true. I mean, obviously, it's not limited to mobile technology. Any type of technology can be used for malicious purposes, or fraudsters, et cetera, can try to use it to manipulate people and gain access to their data. A lot of that comes down to, individual responsibility as well. We can do a better job of making sure we use strong security measures, passwords, those types of things, not click on emails that we're not familiar with. So, our industry, we spend millions every year trying to improve security, implementing new technologies, and us as individuals have to do that as well.
I guess what I was getting at more than the security and nefarious side of it is just the straight up technology and the reliance on it when it comes to networks working and fiber working and all that goes with it, right? That and again, not to criticize the industry certainly, or to try and turn back the clock by any stretch, but the reality is that we are extremely reliant on this for banking, for appointments, and on it goes. Not a bad thing, but with that comes some vulnerability, I suppose.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's trade-offs with everything. I mean, it can't be argued the incredible productivity gains and convenience, et cetera, that we've gained through new digital technologies. But as you mentioned, we become very reliable on them. That's, again, why, both with working with governments and making the investments we're continuing to increase the reliability of our networks. We see instances where, a construction crew might accidentally cut a fiber line, et cetera, or there may be a huge natural disaster, for example, Hurricane Fiona, which knocks out power and therefore knocks out internet services as well. But when you think about it, I mean, the reliability of the networks are quite incredible, especially given a country the size of ours. And every time there is a mishap, though, it's lessons are being learned, and people are taking measures to prevent it from happening again.
How about the government's role in all this, and how regulated the industry is? Do you think that it's overregulated, underregulated, or what are your thoughts, I guess, on government's overreach or reach at all in the industry?
Yeah, well, I think the government is always trying to strike a balance between making sure we have robust competition in the industry, as well as making sure they maintains the incentives to invest. Our industry invests over $12 billion a year in expanding and enhancing networks. And our concern right now is that some of the steps they've taken has really hampered investment. It's really put the brakes on some investment because it's made it unreasonable to make those investments, no reasonable prospect of making a return on those investments. And yet we have very robust competition. People may not realize it, but when you look at Statistics Canada data, cell phone prices have gone down over 50% over the past 5 years, and that's a result of competition, not regulation. And I think they've put a bit too much weight on one side of the scale. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that it's hampering investments. And we want to make those investments to improve coverage in rural areas, remote areas, et cetera. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that with some of the government policies.
Can you give me some more examples about policies and steps that have hampered investment?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's one right now that is very top of mind. It's more on the sort of home internet than the wireless side of things, but it does bleed over into it. And that is a recent CRTC policy, which would allow the three largest carriers in Canada, Bell, TELUS, and Rogers, to become resellers, operate as resellers on the networks of their competitors, not just each other, but the smaller regional providers. So, for example, your part of the country, the East Links, for example, they would have to let those large carriers use their networks to provide services. And we don't want to see that, because we want the builders to be able to build and to be able to make a reasonable return on their investment. But this policy will hamper that, because it really guts some of the business case for making those investments if they have to turn around and allow their competitors to operate on their networks.
Okay, when it comes to cost for cell phone usage, I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Canada is the most expensive jurisdiction in the world. First of all, is that accurate or not?
No, it's absolutely not. It's not. There's some pretty very questionable reports that are out there, which try to suggest things like that. We're not the most expensive, and we're not the cheapest, and there's no, we couldn't be the cheapest given the size of our country and the relatively small number of people that live in this country and how our population is dispersed. But if you look at, the national carriers in Canada and the U.S., you look at the AT&Ts, Verizon, T-Mobiles, et cetera. When you look at their entry-level plans, 5G plans, they're more expensive in the U.S. than they are in Canada. And as I mentioned, prices were quite high in Canada, but over the past 5 years, they've come down dramatically, over 50%, according to StatsCan. And if you look at some of the most popular plans, like the 10 gig plans, 50 gig plans, if you count, adjust for inflation, their prices over the past 4 years have come down by over 70%. So, again, that's a result of there being a lot of competition, that the carriers are fighting tooth and nail to win over subscribers, and consumers who are out there shopping right now are seeing the difference.
All right. What about opening the market up to other foreign entrants? Is that something that you have concerns over, or what are your thoughts on the future and foreign ownership?
Yeah, not really. I mean, right now, foreign companies can come in and set up shop. The only restriction is that they can't come in and buy Bell, Rogers, or TELUS, but they can start a company today. So there were more strict restrictions, but in around 2012, the Harper government removed many of those restrictions. But the reality is, if you look around the world, most countries have 3 to 4 main wireless network operators. It's because of a very capital-intensive industry. It can only support a certain number of players who have to make those billions of dollars of investments every year. You look at Canada, for example, the size, the expense, it's one of the most expensive places to build networks. And we have a very small market for customers. Mm-hmm. You look down in the States, they have 3 main carriers. Canada, we have 3, plus we have Freedom, which is almost a national carrier. Plus, we have regionals like Eastlink. We have Videotron in Quebec, and we've got SaskTel in Saskatchewan, etc. So, not scared of competition. They can come in now, but I believe most foreign players would look at the market and say, "There's not a real opportunity for us. It's a small country. It's well served. There's robust competition bringing down prices. It wouldn't make economic sense for them."
And what about protection of the infrastructure built by the parent companies? Is that protected by law?
Protected in terms of
not allowing foreign companies to come in and have access to their towers and infrastructure.
Well, there's certain investment regulations and other reviews that have to be done by government. So, government can do certain reviews for national security purposes, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that is already covered in terms of a government can ensure that our national security and our sovereignty is protected.
Okay, and rural coverage, of course, and government and subsidizing rural coverage. What are your thoughts on the future of that?
Well, it's a very important part of it. Again, going back to the size and the population dispersion in Canada, there are areas of Canada where it's very difficult to build there because of the expense, and that's where partnerships between different levels of government and the private sector are very important. Our industry has paid to the federal government about $30 billion for the rights to use spectrum. We also fund the CRTC's broadband fund, which is making investments in expanding wireless connectivity. And we're seeing provinces, there's big push to build, to do projects to build, home internet and internet to businesses. And now we're seeing provinces looking at wireless and looking at some of the gaps. I know Nova Scotia is doing that, for example. And that's a big part of making sure that we can connect all Canadians. We want to make the investments, and we also know that we need to partner with government in some areas of the country where it can't be done by private sector alone.
Eric, good chat. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Eric Smith, the Senior Vice President of the Canadian Telecommunications Association. Now we've got some time for you. What is on your mind on this Thursday? The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Give us a call. What is on your mind? Again, 902-405-6000. One of the things that I would like you to perhaps weigh in on is affordability or lack thereof in this province. The reason why I bring it up, because a couple of stories that I saw this morning. One on the CBC website, the share of income Halifax households typically spent on housing and transportation costs in 2024 comparable to cities like Toronto. This according to Stats Canada data. That's right, folks, comparable to Toronto. Also, from the Fraser Institute this morning, at $50,000 of income, taxpayers in Nova Scotia face the highest marginal provincial income tax rates in Canada. Again, by the Fraser Institute. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on this province? Is it overpriced based on your ability to earn money, make a reasonable income, and again, pay your bills and survive? Is this province overpriced? And have you considered leaving the province because of it? 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Your calls when we come back. All right, taking your calls. The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Something that I'd like you to talk about or weigh in on today. Again, you can get into whatever you'd like, but one of the things that caught my attention today is affordability. I saw this story on the CBC website this morning. The share of income Halifax households typically spent on housing and transportation costs in 2024 comparable to cities like Toronto, according to Stats Canada data. Half of households in Halifax were estimated to spend about 31% or more of before-tax income on those two expense categories. In Toronto, that figure was 30%. So it's hard to believe, folks, that we are right on par just about with Toronto when it comes to those two items, housing and transportation costs. 30%. And I would dare say for many people listening out there, it's much more than that. As rents continue to soar particularly in Halifax, but not only in Halifax, we hear about this in communities right across the province. So also taxation is a challenge. From the Fraser Institute today, at $50,000 of income, taxpayers in Nova Scotia face the highest marginal provincial income tax rates in Canada. Again, from the Fraser Institute. Specifically, at $50,000 of income, Nova Scotia has the highest provincial income tax rate at almost 15% on the next dollar earned, far higher than Ontario at 5%. That is a massive difference, folks. Almost a 10% difference. And it leaves people to question at some point, how much money can you charge people, or how much money can people afford to live here in Nova Scotia, and in particular Halifax? We know that historically the Maritimes have been a bargain. And because of that, wages have not been that high. Not for everybody, but certainly for a lot of people. And it wasn't all that long ago where a couple of people making average income could survive in this province and in this city, and even buy a home. Not a luxurious home, but perhaps a bungalow, a fixer-upper, a duplex, something like that. And you could raise a family. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, relatively speaking, where jobs like meat cutters, if there are even still those professions, and go right down the list where people could make kind of that middle income wage and survive. But unfortunately, those times are vanishing right before our eyes. And one of the things that I want you to ask about, folks, is this province now overpriced? Is it becoming unaffordable for you to live here? If not already unaffordable for you to live here? And we see it with people living in encampments and in tents at levels we'd never seen before, and people who would never have expected to be in that situation. Not that anybody expects to be homeless, but the working poor, as I refer to it as. What are your thoughts on this, folks? Is this province overpriced due to taxation, housing, food, transportation, power rates? And have you considered possibly leaving this area? And if not, if you could, would you? Look, we all know that Nova Scotia is a beautiful place to live. We get that. And I understand that. That's why I'm here, because it is a beautiful place to live. And Halifax is, for the most part, despite all of the kind of bemoaning and complaining that we tend to do, is a beautiful city. Not without its challenges, but at the end of the day, folks, you have to be able to make a living and survive and even thrive in order to be content and in order to want to stay here. And if you're a young person and you can leave and go somewhere else and be taxed at 5% or less, as opposed to taxed through the teeth at the percent that the Fraser Institute is telling us, dude, to me, it's almost a no-brainer. So for those of you listening out there right now who are in that kind of, on that bubble of perhaps thinking about leaving, look, we don't want to lose anybody here. We want people to stay. But again, you have to be able to have some realistic goals and achieving those goals of being able to not only just survive and get by, but to perhaps thrive a bit and to live that dream, as they say. The Canadian dream of owning a home and of being able to provide for your family and perhaps go on some vacations and live a life that is out of reach seemingly more and more every day for more and more people. So what's your take on this, folks? Give us a call. Want to hear from you. 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Is the Canadian dream no longer in reach for you because of the cost of living? Or if it is it becoming more and more difficult to maintain that? Give me a call, folks. I want to hear from you. 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Let's kick it off with Eric. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Todd. How you doing?
I'm well, you?
Not too bad. Well, answer your questions. I'm making now what I made 20 years ago when I worked with the city, keeping my head above water. I can't swim, so I'm not drowning, but I'm pretty close to drowning because Halifax is living beyond its means. They can't compare to the other provinces or the other cities out there. And they're just biting off more than what they can chew. I mean, it's a foregone conclusion. If I was 20 years younger, I would leave. I'd go back to Ontario. I mean, but I got to stay here. At 76 years old, I don't have any other choice.
Yeah, for sure. But if you were younger and you had mobility, you would definitely consider going, would you?
Well, yeah, because, I mean, it doesn't look like there's too much at the end of the rainbow. I don't know. Maybe I'm blind or something, but I mean, I just can't see it, prospering. I don't know. It's just a sad state of affairs. It's frustrating, and the thing when you pick up the radio or you watch a newscast, it's getting out of line. And like I said, they've bitten off more than what they can chew, and I don't know what they're going to do to try to keep people here. I feel for the youth. I really do. I feel strong about what's down the road for the youth. The picture doesn't look too bright.
Okay, Eric. Appreciate the call, pal. Take care.
Okay.
All right, 902-405-6000. Nancy's giving us a call. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, how are you doing today, Todd?
I'm well, you?
I'm very good. I listen to your show all the time. And this one I really had a feeling about. I think it sums up quality of life. Like you said, why do people want to come here, or would you want to leave? I absolutely would not. I was born, bred, raised. Everything is here. My family had family here, and it's quality of life. Would I want to live in the middle of Toronto compared to what I have here? Sit on my deck, watch the bluenose come and go, watch the porpoises play on the beach myself with my granddaughter. Quality of life, Todd. That's it.
No, I hear you, Nancy, but for what you described, sitting on your deck, for too many people out there, that's out of reach right now, and they're not sitting on their deck because they don't have a deck to sit on, and they have no hope of ever having that and living that dream. Okay, Nancy's gone. That's my point that I'm making. And look, if you're comfortable and I get it, believe me, I'm here because I love this region and I love the Maritimes. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And I'm very fortunate that I have a house and that I have a wife who makes a decent living, and we're able to have two incomes, and we're able to get by and do okay. But look, folks, for too many out there, for many of you out there, that is not the scenario. 902-405-6000. Mike, hello.
Good morning. Yes, calling in today's subject. Now, I'm plus 75. I just retired last year I was private practice as a lawyer, but basically grew up here. And what I'm noticing is our economy is government driven, particularly in HRM. And except for fisheries, etc., people aren't making any money. We don't produce enough down here. And it's like what we're hearing now, it's going to be like going down the road all over again. People are going to be leaving because there was no opportunity. I mean, the idea of a good living in Nova Scotia still is a government job, be it provincial, federal, or municipal.
Yeah,
that hasn't changed. I mean, there's no big major employers except for Michelin. If they ever fold their tent, the province would be in dire straits. Mm-hmm. And that's our problem. And I look at a small example, the grain elevator. I know farmers down in the valley depend on the grain elevator, and they're going to close it down. Mm. We've got to do more things to enhance private sector here.
Well, shipbuilding in Irving, shipbuilding, I'd say, would be a one of those private sector
major
jobs. Yeah.
Yes, major. We need that. But if you go outside, go drive up the Eastern Shore. The shutters are on the place.
Yeah.
Because I sailed, so we go up the coast, and like you go into Cancel, it's like a ghost town.
Yeah. I would say, Mike, I would say even some of those coveted government jobs now are not lucrative by any stretch. A lot of those, I'm not sure what the baseline provincial worker makes, but sure, at some levels that they're in six figures. We know there's a sunshine list. But for many, they're making $60,000, $65,000, $70,000, and that no longer is big money anymore.
That's correct. I agree, but we must encourage private sector investment down here, and that's why I think we need a pipeline for natural gas. We need better rail service, like a new rail service for freight to the Canso Strait, so that industry gets port develops. Mm-hmm. Those two things alone, I submit, would make a huge difference down here. Take time, but we got to do it.
Yeah, and of course, Premier Tim Houston is bullish on natural resource extraction, and this is one of the reasons why he says that we need to have, to your point, a private sector investment, some new money in the region.
Yes. And the other point I want to raise, I was listening to the fellow who was calling you discussing cell phone rates.
Yeah.
My only anecdotal evidence from my personal experience, I have a daughter who been living in Australia for 16 years. We go down there regularly, spend about 2 months a year, and the same data package, and usually more, is $40 a month. where up here I'm paying well over 100.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, they have a population that's similar to Canada's. They're spread out. Doesn't matter if you have a data package in Alice Springs or in the West Coast in Perth. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than Canada, and they have lots of competition.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, thanks for the call, pal. Appreciate it. Good comments.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right,
Bye
take care. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, taking your calls, 902-405-6000. Couple quick emails and back to phones talking about affordability. This one from Trevor says, one of the reasons I left Halifax to work in Calgary was affordability. I made pretty good money in Nova Scotia, but I still had a hard time with the cost of living wise. When I moved to Calgary, I was able to save a lot of money, and now I have a chance to retire at 65 eventually. This one from Steve, then back to the phone. Steve says, like you, I'm from St. John. I've lived in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. I was making a pretty good living here until COVID. The cost of living here has increased that much and that now it's starting to affect me financially. Tax increases, power increases, municipality tax increases. It does not stop. I'm in my 60s now, and if it wasn't for the fact that finding a doctor is near impossible, I'd move back to New Brunswick in a heartbeat. I don't want to do it anymore. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Talking about affordability in Nova Scotia. And is the province becoming overpriced when it comes to inflation and taxation and on it goes? 902-405-6000. Mike, hello.
Morning, Todd.
Hi there.
Yeah, this province has just gone ridiculous, honestly. I used to work out west in the past, and in the back of my mind, I think about it a lot more lately than I swore I would never do it again because you miss family and the events that you miss. But it's getting crazy. And just to put it in perspective, like when I was 20 years old and got my first real job, I always thought, if you can get up, I'd love to make 75, 80,000 a year. Well, I'm making about 75 now, and I'm struggling. Like. Yeah. We're 25 years ago, if you made 75,000, you were living high on the hog. You had a nice big house and a nice vehicle and some toys.
Yeah, even 10 years ago, you were doing quite well at 75,000.
Yeah, even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And well, just to put it in perspective, so my father retired 17 years ago, and he was told when he retired that living within your means, you're going to be fine. You're going to have no issues. Well, now here he's 77 this year, and he's scared he's going to run out of money before he dies, just because of since 2020, how much the cost of livings went up, and luckily they own their own house. It's paid for, like he said. If it wasn't for that, he'd have to find a part-time job, go back to work.
Yeah, but even owning your own house, Mike, you know yourself. There's upkeep. You need a roof done. You need windows done. And whatever. These things come up, and the cost for repairs is astronomical now. It's unbelievable how much it costs to get anything done.
Oh, it is. It's absolutely ridiculous. Dad had to have a couple windows replaced last year, and like $5,000 for one window. It's crazy.
Yeah. For
just an insert, like you pop the old one out and put the insert in, and like $5,000. It's nuts.
Right.
And luckily, me and my buddy did it for him. We didn't have to pay anyone, but. Yeah, I don't know how some people are doing it, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, have you so you say that leaving might be something that you might have to do, or you're considering?
It's not something I would have to do. Like, I get by, but there's no extras at the end of the day. So I think about it every now and then. Again, I do. Yeah, I got a pretty good job where I'm at and good people, and I like where I work. But at the end of the day, that doesn't pay all the bills.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Mike, thanks for the call, bud.
Yeah.
Take care. 902-405-6000. Norman, hello.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. You?
Good. It's probably been about a year since I've called in. I'll say yes to all the above with the questions you were asking. And what we've done, my kids can't afford to rent. We lived out around the airport. My wife and I, we sold our house. And we bought a big piece of property like up in Pictou County. And I mean, I'm building a house from scratch. I've never poured a slab, but I'm going to do it. I'm an electrician by trade, and I'm going to build a house. And I'm going to give a little, land to my kids, and they're going to build their places. And it's pretty crazy if you know how to do it, how much it costs, how little it costs, I guess, compared to paying people. But I felt like I had to do this. And with food insecurity and stuff like that, and the amount of people going to food banks and everything just getting so expensive, like I wanted a piece of land where we could hunt, have a wood stove. You can cut a tree down, you can split it and throw it in the wood stove and heat your home, like getting back to basics and getting cheap. And I feel bad for people, there's not many people that could build a house right from scratch. I've never done it, but I know I have the know-how to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty sad that we've come to this point of having to do this. But my kids will never own a home if they had to try to buy one or pay somebody to build one. Never in a million years would they be able to afford a house. But this way, they'll be able to get a roof over their head. So I don't have to be concerned about that. But Nova Scotia, there's very little industry. And I've called in here before, and I follow politics. I used to. After the last election, I had to back away so I don't drive myself insane. But, I mean, the last election, I was excited if Poilievre would have gotten in for the simple fact of wanting to cut capital gains tax for corporations in Canada if they reinvested it into their companies or into Canadian companies. That would have been huge for Canada to jumpstart our economy and jobs and stuff. But all of the stuff that we're talking about, it's a waste of time to even talk about a solution as long as we have the government that we do federally, because they created the entire mess. Like, immigration is insane, and I feel bad for the immigrants coming here. I'm in construction. I've talked to some young fellas. One Indian young fella, he said his grandmother sold land in India, which is a very valuable commodity, for him to come here and get a good start. And he's working like just, dead-end jobs and stuff and having a hard time affording to live here. Like, immigration is a mess for the people in Canada. It's a mess for the people coming into Canada. And it has caused this entire situation. And anybody who doesn't think that it has, they're just kidding themselves. Mm-hmm. So until we get like a serious change in government and direction federally, we're all just banging our heads against the wall, unfortunately.
Okay, Norm. Well, good luck with your plans. Hopefully it all goes well. And thanks for the call, pal. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Take care. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Talking about affordability or lack thereof when it comes to living here in Nova Scotia and in Halifax. 902-405-6000. John's giving us a buzz. Hello, John.
Hey, Todd. Just another day in the Halifax apocalypse. I'm loving this segment. It's actually kind of therapeutic because I don't feel so alone anymore to struggle.
All right.
Okay, but anyway, I'll just tell a couple of examples here. So I was talking to this one woman on the weekend. She makes $70,000 a year. She owes $20,000 in student loans. She works at the hospital with a government job, and she lives in Mulgrave Park. She can't afford a 3-bedroom apartment for her and her 2 kids at the market rate, so she pays $1,500 at Mulgrave Park, and by the time she pays her student loan and everything else out, she's actually going to the food bank.
Wow. And you hear stories like that all the time because you tell me about them, right?
Well, yeah, no, but even some of my customers, they have degrees. They're entry-level accountants, paramedics, entry-level police officers, even because the HRP, they don't make $100,000 till they've been on for 4 years, so they're at the 60 range for a while. Yeah. But they're all living home with their parents. Mm. Or like roommates, or even the entry-level military guys. It's just, I've never seen like so many professional people like just struggling. But I guess what frustrates me is like someone like the baby boomers and all that. Not that I'm picking on that group, but them and like some the guys that I grew up with. Like I ended up getting divorced, I lost my house, blah 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 blah. But anyway, like people that grew up with that bought their houses in like the early 2000s or before everything went crazy. It's like some of these boomers and this group of people. They're like the haves because they got in, even making these average wages, and they're okay. But like it's like everyone else is screwed. It's just, and they can't seem to wake up to like what's going on around them, where they just think people need to manage their money better.
Yeah, for sure. And look, a lot of people, it's not only the cost of living out of control, but there's no end in sight, right? When you lose hope, that's when it gets bad. And I can see why people do lose hope, right, John?
Yeah, I mean, like I'm here right now because of my mother's health and everything. I might make a life decision because I'm only just barely getting by.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm surviving is because I'm on an old lease and I can stay in my apartment. But I don't know. The last thing I'm going to say, Todd, because I know you want to get to other callers there, is clearly the last 10 years of government policy and everything has not been working. But like Halifax is just like Nova Scotia. It's like such a far left leaning city. That like, can people like wake up and just see like obviously this isn't working and maybe we need a change? But I don't know, Todd. I guess elbows up.
All right, John.
I'll let you go, buddy.
Okay, pal. Okay, take care. 902-405-6000. Rob, hello.
Hey, how you doing today, Todd?
Doing well, you?
Oh, not too bad. I definitely agree. Okay, so I did some research in Halifax. Nova Scotia is the most expensive province and expensive city to live in all of Canada. And because we got the Liberals in, I don't know why our country voted in the Liberals because of Trump, but I can tell you Kearney would have done better. But I can tell you right now, the cost of living has gone up and wages are not going up. So how do you expect people to live? I've seen more homeless people on the streets. I've seen people working extra work all the time just to make ends meet. Like, I'm even struggling just to make ends meet. Like, it's crazy. You know, like, it's just the government, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and there's no end to it. Like, something's got to happen. Ever since COVID, everything's been screwed up, right? And matter of fact is that I heard also is that by September coming, there's supposed to be another global pandemic with a new strand of COVID, which is crazy itself, right? Like, I mean, like, we're getting the shitty end of the stick here, sorry, but I feel like that there can be a lot more done for the people, but yet we keep voting in the government, and why bother voting? Like, my vote don't count because the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and there's not going to be any middle class soon.
Rob, you say more can be done. Like what do you think government should be or could be doing that it's not doing now?
Well, example on your show there last week about the air conditioning for low-income people.
Yeah.
You know, I live at home with my parents because I can't afford to get an apartment on my own. Mm-hmm. There should be more accommodations the government should be giving to help the people out more instead of maybe tax breaks, maybe accommodations for the people instead of just like, you know what I mean, the way things are going, because everything is so costly. Like I'm actually so close to going bankrupt right now, and I'm working my ass off. I barely sleep, I barely eat because all I do is work just trying to make ends meet, and it's retarded. And I've talked to other people in other provinces that I have friends in, and the cost of living to do my job, I can make more money at another province with the cost of living that's lower. And the fact is that we're the least. We get the shitty end of the stick from the government.
All right. 902-405-6000. Folks, let's keep the language under control, please. Okay. You all know this. I don't like to drop callers, and I get his frustration, but let's try and keep it clean, okay? 902-405-6000. Jim, hello.
Hey, Todd. Just want to share with you. I came from Ontario 7 years ago, not because of affordability. I came down because I just wanted to enjoy the lifestyle, but the bonus was affordability. Bought a house in Cole Harbour for under $3,000, which was a very comfortable place. Now I look at it and think, wow, how would anybody pay over $5,000 for this place? Well, they do. My reason, I think, is for thinking what's happening is Nova Scotia has become an investor's paradise. I had to rent for a few months while we found ourselves doing some house hunting. rented a very comfortable apartment in Cold Harbor for $875 a month. Very comfortable, 2-bedroom, you name it. Before I actually moved out of that building into our home, some Toronto investors actually bought the apartment building. So I think if you look throughout the city and even beyond throughout the province, Nova Scotia, the best kept secret, it was no longer a secret, great investment paradise, and investors don't come in to make little money or lose money. They know how to make it into big money with supply and demand. I don't like to get political, but I think the idea of growth was so promoted by both McNeil and the current government. Let's get to 1 million people in this province. That's when you don't have planned growth. I think that's target growth, not healthy. But for me, investors' paradise, and guess what? More and more foreign money, and I don't mean just foreign internationally, I mean domestic as well, poured in here, not as people coming to make this their home of choice, but to make it their home of investment. It always goes up. I lived in Toronto my whole life. I watched the inflation be out of control. I watched housing go crazy. And frankly, the food, et cetera, et cetera. I just came back from 2 weeks holidays. I went in to buy a dozen eggs in Toronto and Sobeys. Cost me $3.29, $3.49. I went in yesterday here, $5.09, and that's a special. On and on it goes. But it's an investor's paradise, and that's, frankly, I think the side effect that comes with it.
Okay, Jim, interesting comments. Thanks for the call, pal.
Okay.
All right, take care, 902-405-6000. Hello, Bill.
How you doing, Todd?
I'm well, you?
Not too bad. Todd, a couple of little things. I had an interesting experience the other night. I like this corned beef and cabbage on a Thursday, and I decided to go to a new place to try out some new corned beef. Well, I had the usual experience. I had the corned beef. It was all right, but shortcake. Strawberry shortcake. The serving was with hamburger buns, so I got to call it strawberry buns, I guess, or something. Did you ever have that experience?
No, I have not.
And then to top it off, I didn't have a big meal there. It was a big meal, but got some home. So I just made it to get home. So that was a bad night. You know, the restaurants, I'm sure you could see it. I know I go to one in particular, getting corned beef, as it gets smaller and smaller at the same price. Anyway, that's my corned beef one for there. Now, I'm sitting down at the Public Gardens there a couple of days ago and talking to a buddy of mine who used to work in the Point Pleasant Park, maintenance, 23 years, retired, don't have a car. You know, it's a shame. Apparently, according to him, the bus goes to the Golden Gates, and that's it. So to get from the Golden Gates down to Black Rock Beach, for instance, there's no bus, which is kind of disappointing. It really must be frustrating for him that used to work there all his life and can't even get down to see the old haunts. What do you think?
Well, I don't really have much else to add to it, Bill, to be honest with you.
The other thing, somebody brought up again about the grain elevator that we tore down. I was down to the big board meeting, and I brought the subject up again about advertising on it. And actually this time, the head person in charge of the grain elevator liked the idea. And this is waiting to be picked up by somebody that's innovative, looking for something different. It could be a major tourist attraction to put advertising on the grain elevator. It would be a trend for the other grain elevators across the country, and it would save it. It would be a real major tourist attraction. So we're out there listening. Should come alive and talk to me, or see what you can do to get some major advertising company on board. What do you think?
Sure, why not, Bill? Your ideas seem to always catch on, and I think you have a great business sense, and I think you're onto something there for sure.
Okay, hang in there.
Okay,
guys.
bud. Thanks. Take care, Bill. Take care. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, a quick email and right back to the phones. John says this is my girlfriend and I, 30 years old, have a combined income of $160,000 once she finishes her master's program, and are fortunate to have a significant amount of money from a settlement for a down payment on a home. And we still feel the need to leave the province to seek more affordable cost of living. Even with $200,000 down payment, we're looking at a $2,000 plus mortgage payment plus utility insurance in Halifax. We refuse to put ourselves in a situation where we are house poor, and thus we'll be leaving despite all the things that make the Maritimes great. Instead, we will move to Edmonton, where housing prices are 30 to 40% less, lower taxes, and significantly better infrastructure. That comes from John. There's just one example, folks, of probably countless too many stories just like that. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Scott, hello.
How you doing today, Todd? Great day to be a Canadian.
Indeed. Yeah, always.
Yes. Okay, quick story. I'm 61 years old. My wife is 60. We moved to Halifax in 1995 from Yarmouth. And we had to live with family, and we had a small rental apartment that we were fortunate enough to get back then. We had a young girl, 7 years old, and a new baby. And it took till 1998. We were making a combined income of about $65,000. So we went to the bank to find out about buying a house. We are talking like 27 years ago.
Yeah.
And the bank, we give them all the numbers and everything. And the bank told us at that time we could afford $200,000 mortgage. And I said, there's no way I can afford that. Oh, no, the numbers are there. And I felt the pressure then that the banks were putting on me to borrow more money, but I didn't. I had the due diligence to know that that wasn't it. So we bought a semi for $78,000.
Mm-hmm.
Good. We didn't pay. We paid on it, sold it, paid it now to get to the house we're in now. So fast forward, COVID hit. The interest rates were almost zero, or were. So a lot of people get great time to buy, great time to do this, and great time to do that. What did the banks do again? People were going in on a certain amount of income. Banks were telling them they could borrow all this money. Some took the bait, some didn't take the bait, and I call it credit poor. Because the money you borrow on a line of credit or on a credit card and to do whatever you want to do, buy trips, boats, camps, that money has to be paid back. And you still have to pay your other bills. Now people I know that got in that position, they went from, wow, look at what we're getting, and wow, the interest rates are low, to, oh no. Some of them I know are a couple payments back on their house. Mm-hmm. They're a couple, 3 payments on their credit card behind, and they don't know what they're going to do. We're doing okay. We're surviving a little bit above surviving. And that's because we're not credit poor. We don't know anything on our credit cards. We don't know anything on our lines of credit. We've been fortunate, but it's fiscal management. But the banks have to take a little bit of the blame because they're encouraging people back then to borrow more money. And plus the banks are putting money aside. They tell you they're putting way more money aside now for bankruptcies and people delinquent on their houses. So it's the bank is partly to blame, but the people have to do their due diligence and say, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, well said, Scott. Well said. And I agree. Personal responsibility is part of it. And that's part of the story that perhaps I haven't talked about enough, is that people do rush to get into debt. And unfortunately, you're absolutely right. Fiscal responsibility is definitely a part of the conversation. You're 100% correct, Scott.
Yeah, and a lot of times now, Todd, is that I find the generation behind us, they want what we have that we've worked all our life for in 5 years.
Mm.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to work for everything you get, but you gotta think ahead. You can't be like a horse and have blinders on and not think of tomorrow. And COVID did ruin a lot of people financially. And I believe the banks are partly responsible, and the people that go in to borrow money should know, no, I can't afford $800,000. I can't. Mm-hmm. I can right now because of the interest rates.
Mm.
But now they're in financial trouble.
Yeah. Okay, Scott, thanks for the call.
I feel for them, and we give to as many charities as we can, because we know there's the food banks, and there's a women's shelter out here in Hubley, and we give to those as much as we can. We donate as much as we can all year long. We give a little bit, because if you gave to everybody, we might not be in the situation we're in, but we're fortunate, and we donate as much as we can.
Okay, Scott, thanks for the call. Interesting.
Thank you.
Take care. Well, let's talk to Jack. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Todd. How are you doing today?
I'm well, you?
I'm doing okay. My situation, I'm a young professional, and I would love to leave the province to take advantage of lower tax rates, affordability in housing. But my job has sort of stuck me a little bit. Just what I do, it's hard to transfer to a different province. You basically have to start all over. And in addition to having family in the province. But so although we're doing okay, my wife and I, and we bought pre-COVID, we're sort of stuck in what we were hoping to be, a stepping stone of a house into our forever home sometime down the road. But it doesn't look like we'll ever have any other home than the home that we have, just based on how housing prices have gone crazy in the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's disheartening, hey, Jack. Obviously, like you said, you would hope that you'd be able to have that mobility and to be able to upgrade, but it's just that scenario is becoming less and less realistic all the time, and you're a good example of that, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, my wife doesn't work, so I understand that that was maybe a more common thing back in the day, and it's something that I wish was able to be commonplace in today's society, but it's not reasonable for a number of families where both parents need to work and just to get by.
Yeah.
Not even to flourish, just to get by.
That's true. Okay, Jack, appreciate the call, pal. Take care.
Okay.
All right. Gustavo, hello.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I think we tend to think of COVID as a pivotal moment, as if before COVID everything was great, and after COVID everything has been ruined. But I think we have to think who was benefited by COVID. I personally think that the Canadian giants, the mega corporations in Canada, are the ones mostly benefited by after COVID. Coming from my own personal perspective, I came to Canada in 2022, and I've always lived in Nova Scotia. I came straight to Dartmouth and then Halifax, and I come from Brazil. And I feel very guilty for the lowered standards of living as soon as I came to Canada. And I planned, when I started planning to come to Canada, and that was in 2018, things were extremely different. And I planned with one cost of living in mind, and I came up here, and I am before a situation completely different. And I think, talking about immigration, I think the excess of demand is one of the main causes to drive property prices up. That's for rent, and that's for purchasing purposes as well. And Nova Scotia, we suffer a lot from the high taxes and the low minimum wage. The minimum wage doesn't keep up with the province cost of living. And I don't think looking ahead, it's a very good future, because the housing minister doesn't seem very concerned about fixing the housing crisis. The critic said that he's actually benefiting from it. So it's a very dire situation to be in Nova Scotia and to be a newcomer to Canada. And this situation, I have Canadian friends that I actually apologize for feeling like I'm part of the problem. The immense demand for rent. And you see how sensible that is, because as soon as the federal government started signaling that they would lower immigration, lower the amount of students and temporary workers, which was my scheme of immigration, I came as a temporary worker, the rent costs starting to go down. It happened in Toronto, and then that is gradually happening in Nova Scotia as well. Not to the pace that we need, but it is. So I think lowering demand for housing is one thing. And I think in Toronto, you talked about Toronto. I think they have more options within the GTA to rent a place, whereas in Nova Scotia, if you think about urban centers, Halifax, the HRM, let's say, there's no many options of apartments available. That is something that comes to our detriment. In Toronto, they have Mississauga. They have Scarborough. They have so many places around the GTA, and here with Halifax, Dartmouth, basically Bedford. And it's hard to find a rent in downtown Halifax. You can pay upwards of $2,900 for a 2-bedroom, and that's just that's not doable for a person who is working for a wage of, let's say, $18 per hour, and who's benefiting from stagnating the stagnation of wages. Irving's benefiting for it. I think Sobeys benefiting for it. Bell, the big Canadian companies, and it's. I like to point out that the UN said some months ago, a year ago, I think, that Canadian labor, immigrant labor within the agriculture in Canada, it's analogous to modern slavery. So I think the federal government to start doing something about immigration, because immigration has been like a scam, unfortunately, for immigrants and for Canadians. And about the housing crisis, that's urgent.
Right. Okay, Gustavo, listen, you're making some really interesting points. We're just out of time, but I appreciate the call, and I think you make some valid points. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, take care. Thanks for the calls, everybody. We didn't get to all of you for that. I apologize. A popular segment, unfortunately, it's something that impacts most of us to some degree, and to many of you, big time. And it's tough for sure. Nova Scotia updates property disclosure rules for coastal land buyers. That when we come back.
Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you.
For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just go to getcopperhead.com. That's getcopperhead.com for your 2 free gifts with purchase. Getcopperhead.com.
Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
People looking to buy coastal property in Nova Scotia now have access to a new disclosure tool to help make informed decisions. Buyers can request information from sellers on property disclosure forms about whether a property has been affected by coastal flooding, erosion, or other drainage issues. Joining us to talk about all this is Nicolas Winkler, a Coastal Adaptation Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre. Nicolas, thanks for joining the show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So I guess this is I'm assuming you would think is a good thing, but certainly no replacement for legislation when it comes to what the province passed the Liberal government passed unanimously and was not enshrined into law by the current government. Correct?
Yeah, I think the property disclosures that were recently announced are a positive development, and I would commend the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission for including them. I think they're really important for people to be able to understand coastal risk when purchasing coastal property. And as we know, buying property tends to be a fairly major sort of once-in-a-lifetime investment for a lot of people. But you know, it does raise questions, and I think there's some considerations that those disclosures don't necessarily include.
All right. So the Coastal Protection Act, which again, as I mentioned, was not instituted by the current government. What would that? How has that changed the coastal protection in general? And what are your thoughts, I guess, in not having that in force?
Well, I think if you look at other provinces like PEI, they're now the leader in coastal protection and coastal management in the region. I recently went to a conference there, and it is amazing how much work they're doing, and it's amazing to see how far back Nova Scotia is when we consider where it could have been with the Coastal Protection Act. We are seeing people infilling on the coast and sort of chipping away at the coast. And the way I look at it, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. And the province dropped the Coastal Protection Act a little over a year ago, and we don't really have meaningful coastal protection for most of Nova Scotia. And to think that in 2019 we could have seen that vision and we don't have now. So that leaves a lot of people exposed. And it's a reminder too that when we spend time on the coast thinking about buying property, we tend to do that, on a nice sunny day when we kind of envision spending time in that space. But we're also in July, and it's a reminder that we're in hurricane season and that things aren't always calm, and both climate change and coastal storms are very real risks for coastal property.
All right, the disclosure change is in addition to other tools introduced by the province in the past year, including a coastal hazard assessment report that offers property-specific information on flooding and erosion risks, and an interactive hazard mapping tool that shows possible coastal impacts. What are your thoughts on those tools?
I think the coastal risk flood map, again, was seen as a positive development, and recently they brought the forecast from 2100 flooding in 2100 to flooding in 2050. But again, if you look at for example, QEII, the risk hazard coastal tool is significantly more detailed. It includes a bunch of other information for people to make decisions on, including, a new layer that's either coming up or recently included that includes shoreline hardening. So I think, again, Nova Scotia is well behind in coastal management. And yeah, I think it's a really missed opportunity that the province had and really dropped the ball on.
How about buyer beware, I suppose, and perhaps is there an onus on developers and buyers of coastal properties to be aware, cognizant of the fact that coastal erosion happens and vulnerability exists along the coast? Anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we each have, a responsibility to make informed decisions and to sort of consider those risks. I think it may be difficult for people to assess coastal risk. There are people who spend their entire careers measuring erosion or storm action, and to think that a layperson looking at some basic information can make some really big informed decision, I find problematic. I think one issue with the property disclosures is that it wouldn't apply to private sales. So, one of the questions I had when I looked at this release is if you have a coastal property that may be at risk or where you have done some flood mitigation risk, are you more likely to try to conduct a private sale? And obviously the argument would be that somebody should use a realtor, but, it does beg that question whether it creates a space for transactions to increase outside of sort of formal real estate transactions that might be able to bypass that. I think the other thing that we see and we know of in Nova Scotia is that when somebody hardens their shoreline, for example, puts a rock wall in front of their coastal property, their neighbors are likely to be negatively affected because that rock wall will now deflect wave action and wave energy to neighboring properties. So it does sort of perpetuate possibly the narrative that if you can afford to build on the coast, you can afford to harden your shoreline, and your neighbor may not be. There are winners and losers here.
How much infilling? You mentioned infilling. How much of an issue is infilling in the province?
We're seeing it up and down the coast. Little pieces here, little pieces there, and it's a question. It's hard to understand exactly what the infilling is for. Sometimes somebody's putting up a shed between a road and the ocean. Sometimes it's a space for somebody to put up a chair, to sort of enjoy the sea view. And I think it's understandable that people kind of want to enjoy, what the coast has to offer. But I think as we do that, we are really reshaping the coast, a little bit at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. And I don't think we have a true grasp of how that coastline will change. And I think ultimately, if we continue down that path, we will end up in a situation where we don't recognize the very coast that we cherish and the very thing we are there to enjoy. It will look very different. And right now, we don't really have anybody managing that. And it's a little bit of, everybody's problem and maybe nobody's responsibility.
Does the federal government have some jurisdiction over infilling?
I think it depends a little bit on the context. So that's a bit of a more complicated question, but generally that jurisdiction over coastal spaces by and large rests in the province, with the province.
Okay, when it comes to municipalities and their ability to manage this, what are your thoughts on that?
I think what people have been warning about when the government dropped the Coastal Protection Act is that it would offload that onto municipalities, and in the case with property disclosures on individual property owners. And we are hearing from municipalities that there are a million other sort of challenges that some municipalities face. Some have maybe more understanding or more political will to undertake coastal protection bylaws. Others may not, and others, just simply don't necessarily have the resources. And if you kind of think of the fact that we're more than a year since the government dropped the Coastal Protection Act, and we really haven't seen much meaningful change in terms of coastal protection in Nova Scotia, and we're yet in another hurricane season. So as far as I can see it, it's not really working.
Okay, Nicolas, appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much. Have a
All
good
right,
day.
take care. Nicolas Winkler, Coastal Adaptation Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre. I saw this story. A Halifax restaurateur named one of the top 100 pizza chefs in the world. We'll have a chat with that chef when we come back. All right, I saw this story on the Global News website. Halifax-based master artisan Cédric Toullec says he was shocked when he found out that he'd been named one of the top 100 pizza chefs in the world. Cédric joins me to talk about all of this. Congratulations.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's quite a distinction. The Best Chef Awards, International Culinary Ranking. Tell us how you found out. How did you find out about this news?
Well, I was really shocked. Like, to be honest, I thought first that was a scam. To be completely transparent with you, we opened like 3 years ago, so we're a baby restaurant still on the beginning of the story, and we received an email one day saying, "Hey, we're happy to tell you that you're invited in Milan for the Best Chef Awards. Please give us the name of your pizzaiolo." And I thought, okay, that's me. And then I told them, like, I also own it. That's why it might be a little bit confusing. And I've been talking to one of their admin person, and they say, no, that's not a scam, Cédric, you're invited. So we were 500-ish for the 24th and the 25th of June event. And then we managed to finish in the top 100, which was not expected. This was not our goal either.
For sure. And your business is Lou Peco Pizzeria in North End, Halifax. How long have you had this business?
So that's 3.5 years. Like we're really baby restaurants still.
Okay, so how did you get on their radar? Did somebody submit your name, or how did this all happen?
Honestly, the answer frustrated most of people because we have no idea. So the way it works is like you can send a recommendation, but we also visited by chefs and innovators, influencers, journalists anonymously. So the way the Best Pizza Chef Awards works is a bit like the Michelin star recognition. You are visited. You don't submit your candidature. You don't submit, hey, I want to know if I'm good for Michelin. I want to know if I'm good for Best Pizza or Best Chef Award. That's the same thing for the ranking in the top 100 best restaurants in Canada that people are more aware of. So you are visited by all those people, and then they design a ranking, and this is how it happened. But we didn't know we were noticed, first of all, and we never heard about it. That's a trophy and a recognition that we knew about. But we were really, really surprised to get there.
What do you think sets you apart? Why do you think your pizza's now so world renowned? What's your secret sauce, I suppose?
The secret sauce is the dough, I guess. that's years I'm perfecting my craft with different masters around the world and a different community of bakers that they love to share. They love as much as we do what the story and the legacy of baking, whatever it's bread or pizza, because as a pizzaiolo, you also craft a tremendous of different kind of breading. And now technology and pizza story is designed really closely with the artisanry, the farmers, like the millers, that they have access to technology to understand what's happening in the flours, whatever you just use a regular flour, 00 or whole wheat or croissant or all kind of flour. We have 5 to 7 different flour in our dough, and I allow myself to play with them depending the season, depending what the miller is telling me, depending of also what I want to do, because as an independent, I have this freedom to do that. And my guests love it, and when I share my knowledge or passion with other colleagues around the world, we are all speaking the same language. It's non-stop training, it's non-stop crafting. The dough is not something we delegate as artisan. I'm the only one that execute the dough. So the more you practice, the more you master, I guess. And the more you want to know. The more you want to know how water is going to impact this kind of flour, impact this kind of grain, impact your digestibility, the nutritional value in the dough, the quality of salt, where it comes from, etc. So there's a lot of little knowledge here and there that make the difference.
How did you get your start? What drew you to making pizza?
I found pizza when I was the most lost in my career, to be honest. I knew I needed to work in the food industry because I love cooking, and my grandma legacy is for something for sure in this story. When I decided that I wanted to be a professional, I took the normal path, went to school, and then tried to work in kitchens as a cook. But as a cook, I was missing something. Then I changed for a little bit of pastry time in my career. Then I was missing cooking. Then I wanted to be an ice cream guy. Then I enjoyed it, but I kind of came back fast in the food industry. I wanted to be for bakers. I fell in love with water and the story of wheat and agriculture. And so I was lost because I wanted everything, and I was changing my mind of what I wanted to be every 6 months or so. So that was really fun, let's say that this way. And while I was traveling in south of France, I heard about a world championship that was happening in Rome. And this is when I discovered the pizza world at a high level that involved culinary skill, baking skill, true knowledge, and how advanced the bakers and the pizzaiolo are. It's incredible. It's incredible and beautiful. So for someone like me, pizza became the medium that I was able to express all the part of me I wanted to be, and it was streamlined through pizza. So I could be the baker I wanted to be every day, the cook I wanted to be, the pastry chef I wanted to be sometimes, etc. So pizza really make me align.
How much of your secrets do you pass on to your staff?
Oh, I pass it all, because while this event in Milan, even the most advanced technique that we share between us, we know that some of the pizzaiolo artisan are far ahead of us. Like, so when you discover something that you think you reinvent the wheel, it's most of the time something your grandparents or grandparents used to do. So we try to just come back to the roots of what they used to do, and we work closely more and more with artisan and miller. That's the real key of it, and you need to understand those elements, like the flour to the wheat first, the flour, the water, and the salt. After that, you decide what you want to do. So what I share with my staff is to avoid all kind of training that involves that you pay for a recipe, you pay for a certification. So what I invite them to do is to understand or to design mentally what they want to execute, what the signature of dough they want to execute, knowing that it won't please everybody, but they need to please themselves first. And then based on that idea they have, then I help them, I guide them, and I develop the taste, the texture, the density, the digestibility, and the nutritional value through that. There is no secret. There is honestly no secrets in cooking. There's just love.
Cédric, since you won this award and get this notoriety, has it increased your traffic in the restaurant? More people stopping in?
Yeah, it's definitely a really, really insane. I was not expecting that. When I came back from Milan, I was expecting just a little bit of increase and then not that much of a shock in terms of volume. But we sold out until since then at 7:30. So, which is going to be extremely frustrating for people that want to come and eat later. We try to adapt. We receive a lot of email, message, and people that come just to say hi. Yesterday, again, we had some tourists that came just to give us a high five, understanding completely that they missed the clock. But yeah, we try to adapt. We try to develop strategy with our team and our kitchen to provide more. But what I told them is, at the end of the day, we are a small pizzeria. We focus on quality and not on volume. So we are going to continue to do what we do, the best we can do, and I will be completely comfortable to say sold out and give an optimum dough. And I will not cut corner there.
Cédric, congratulations. Well done.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
All right, take care. That is Cédric Toullec. And the restaurant is Lou Pico Pizzeria in the north end of Halifax. So I'm hungry now. I want some pizza. Fantastic accomplishment for sure. We'll take a quick break.
Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you.
For a limited time, you can get a free pocket pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just go to getcopperhead.com. That's getcopperhead.com for your 2 free gifts with purchase. Getcopperhead.com.
Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
Fabry disease is a rare genetic disorder that causes certain fat molecules to accumulate in the cells of various tissues, but a groundbreaking gene therapy trial for Fabry disease is showing remarkable promise, bringing hope to patients with this rare genetic condition. Dr. Michael West, nephrologist at the QEII Health Sciences Centre, joins us to talk about this. Dr. West, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate your time, of course.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Todd.
All right, so tell us more about how many people, I guess, first of all, are impacted by Fabry disease?
Well, it's actually kind of common here in Nova Scotia, albeit rare in the rest of Canada and the world. So I'm following about 90 patients from Nova Scotia and another 20 or so from PEI in New Brunswick. So yeah, at least 90 here, and there's a couple more at the IWK. So yeah. But out of a population of 1 million, that's a lot.
Okay, what are the symptoms?
Well, it varies by age, but problems with kidney function, loss of protein in the urine, strokes at an early age, nerve pain in the hands and feet, particularly with a flu illness, heart problems with abnormal heart rhythms, which can be serious or fatal, problems with heart failure, heart attacks, things like that, acute deafness, problems with vision, stomach troubles, bowel problems. There's a whole host of them. So lots of symptoms.
Any speculation as to why it's occurring more often here in Nova Scotia?
Well, we know for sure it's because of what's called a founder effect. There's a common ancestor who had a particular version of this disease. It's genetic, so she had a particular mutation in the gene that's responsible for this. and she has some 3,000 descendants, of which a number of them have the disease. And so they're clustered here in Nova Scotia since 1750. So this disease is older than Nova Scotia.
Okay, so it's not an environmental disease. It has to be passed through the genes. Is that correct?
That's it exactly. It's not environmental. It's inherited. And the gene in question is on the X chromosome, which is the female sex chromosome. And so you get a particular pattern of inheritance with 2 females affected for every male, and the males are severely affected compared with the females. So it's definitely a sexist disease.
What age is onset traditionally, or is it typical?
Typically onsets in early childhood with pain, abdominal discomfort. Kids miss school. They don't feel well. They can't play sports because they get they get more pain, and they don't sweat normally with exertion. So that can lead to worsening pain. So it starts in childhood.
Well, getting a diagnosis, has that been a challenge in the past?
It can be a challenge if there is no positive family history, but most of the time there is a positive history, and people recognize that they may have the same symptoms as other people in their family and then come for testing.
Okay, and the testing is definitive, is it?
It is. It's gene testing. We can measure this missing enzyme level. We can check the gene and find where the mutations are there. Yes, so it is definitive.
All right, so tell us about some of this groundbreaking research and good news on the horizon for this.
Well, thank you for asking me to share that. So up till 2000, we had no treatment for this disease. Then there was development of enzyme therapy. So we're replacing the missing enzyme with enzyme made in the lab, and that's given as a big dose every 2 weeks, and it's very burdensome. There can be problems with infusion reactions, and drugs, antibodies that bind the drug and interfere with it, problems with getting intravenous access, and so forth. Plus, it's $300,000 a year per patient, so it's a big price tag. The gene therapy may be kind of a one-and-done treatment, and so we treated the first 5 men in the world with Fabry disease here in Canada, and we just recently published a 5-year follow-up on these patients, reporting that they are clinically stable. They haven't had any new Fabry complications during this time, that we've seen stabilization of their kidney function as well as their heart status. So it's quite positive. And what we did in this study was basically a stem cell transplant using the patient's own stem cells that we collected out of blood, took them to the lab. We were able to engineer in a new copy of the gene, so to take the place of their copy of the gene, which is got a mutation in it, and then their cells can make enzyme, and the stem cells are just infused back into the patient that donated them through an intravenous. So giving them back is not difficult. In the study, all 12 patients were engrafted. That means the stem cells went back into the bone marrow where they normally live, and those stem cells divide, and their daughter cells become white blood cells and circulate throughout the body, making enzyme and delivering it to the cells that weren't changed with the gene therapy. So we only changed a relatively small population of cells in the body to achieve this result.
Wow, it sounds remarkable. Is it, for all intents and purposes, a cure?
No, it's not a cure because we're not able yet to change all the cells in the body. We're only able to change small populations. Either we use stem cells from the blood. In other reports, people have looked at injecting the new gene into the liver or into the heart. So far we're limited in our scope. So we can't look at this as a cure, but it may certainly be a major step forward, relieving patients of the burden of having to go for infusions every 2 weeks. We don't know how long this will last, but some of our patients are now out at 6 years and stable. So we think that this is certainly a good model for going forward and doing more research into this.
Yeah, life-altering for people, for sure, in some ways. I think that's safe to say. Would you agree? Would you agree?
Yes, it is. And we have one of our patients is here in Nova Scotia, and he was able to stop enzyme therapy during the study for about 3.5 years, and he felt that he never felt better than he did at that time. And in fact, he said at times I even forgot that I had Fabry disease. And so I think it's certainly a positive testimonial, but we need to get more numbers. 5 patients isn't enough to get a license to sell this product, so we need to do further studies on this.
Okay, what's the realistic timeline till you could possibly scale this thing up?
Oh, it's long. It could be 5-7 years. There's lots of challenges, and actually making the viral vector is very expensive and time-consuming. So there's a lot of challenges. It's quite different than with a pharmaceutical product in terms of getting it scaled up. So lots of challenges, but I think it gives us some hope for the future for these patients. And this type of gene therapy would be applicable to other types of genetic diseases as well. So it's not just Fabry disease that can be impacted here, but it's applicable to other genetic diseases. And there's lots of those. So.
Okay, so what about funding? The funding model for it? How do you have to continue to get funding for it? I assume. How's the research funded?
Well, this particular study was funded by CIHR, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which in turn gets its funding through the government and therefore the taxpayers. So we all had a hand in funding this study. We spent about $4 million on it, and we saved about $3.7 million for the provincial health care systems in those patients who were able to stop their enzyme therapy during this time. So we almost broke even in that sense. So certainly doing this research was cost effective in the sense that we covered off most of the research costs. Other sources for research would be from companies themselves, or the NIH in the U.S., although their budget's been cut recently with new president. And there's other grant agencies as well. But yeah, it's tough, very competitive to get money for trials, but that's what we have to do. And I think at this point we're looking at investors to start a new company to take care of the next study.
Dr. West, sounds like you're doing great work. Thanks for doing this today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak with you today.
Indeed. Take care. Dr. Michael West, nephrologist at the QEII Health Sciences Centre. A Nova Scotia golfer making waves on a pretty prestigious tour. We'll chat with that golfer when we come back. All right, saw this story on the CTV website recently. Myles Creighton of Digby, Nova Scotia, chipped in for a birdie on the 18th hole recently to become the 15th player with a 59 or lower on the Corn Ferry Tour. The second score of 59 in 3 days at the Wichita Open. He's the first Canadian ever to do so. Myles Creighton joins me on the show. Myles, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
All right, so the Corn Ferry Tour, this is the tour just below the PGA, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, pretty impressive stuff. Congratulations on that. That sounds that's pretty impressive. How long have you been on the Corn Ferry Tour?
This is my second year on it. So yeah, it kind of works. I explain it to people. It kind of works very similar in the way that baseball would work, in that you kind of work your way up. And kids who come out of college now who are really, really good players can find their way onto the PGA Tour a little quicker. But, with golf, it is a bit of a process to get there. And it's one of the nice things about it is you kind of have to earn your way onto that stage. And so I think the average age for, a rookie on the PGA Tour is around 30, maybe a little bit younger, 29. Yeah. but you hear of the Jordan Spieths and Tiger Woodses of the world, and people might think it happens a little quicker, but for us mere mortals, I guess it does take a little bit of time to get there. So this is part of it.
Okay, so how close are you to the PGA Tour at this point?
Yeah, so our tour, the top 20 on our tour at the end of the year graduate onto the PGA Tour. So we've played, I think 16 events so far, and there's 26 events, so we have 10 left. So yeah, at the end of the season, you got to be in the top 20, and it's just a build-up of you gain points, essentially like a money list, but there's a point value for wherever you finish on the tour, and gaining points, the higher you finish, the more points you get, and being in the top 20 points at the end of the year is kind of how you graduate.
Okay, and where are you ranking right now?
I'm 17th on the points list at the moment.
Wow, 7th, looking good then, eh?
Yeah, it's still a lot of work to be done, but the way the points are structured on our tour is with 26 events and a win being worth 500 points, and if you finish second, it's 300 points, and it quickly drops off. So you can kind of stumble along and be playing well and finishing in the top 10 or top 20 and getting some points, which is also important. But having a win really does give you those points that you need to put you in a spot to where it seems quite feasible. You're playing every weekend or every week, I should say? Yeah, so we have a week off now, and then I have 6 in a row. So I'll play 6 events in a row. Coming up, I leave on Monday, play 6 in a row, and then we have 3 weeks off, and then we have what's called the playoffs, which is essentially the same thing. There's a little bit more points in the last 4 events, and those are the playoffs, and that'll be 4 weeks there. So it's pretty busy traveling, but you tend to enjoy it. You learn to love these weeks off. Yeah, how do you handle the stress? Must be extremely stressful, and to try to have to perform every week, like you said, it's not like you've got a contract. You got to deliver in order to get to where you want to go. How do you manage the stress, I suppose, of playing it at this level? Yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing. I think a lot of people do have the skill and the ability to play on the PGA Tour, but just managing kind of your emotions and the stress, and knowing how to play a golf course and stuff like that is kind of those things that are pretty big separators in our game, and that just comes with experience. I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot in my career and play on a lot of different types of conditions, and been playing tournaments and on a tour since I've been a professional, not on the Korn Ferry Tour, but on the tour below that. And I've just picked up things along the way that, your tendencies and kind of things that can help you when you are in a stressful situation. And a lot of times that is, the difference in winning a tournament or having a good week. How would you describe your strengths of your game? Is it short game, driving game? What strengths do you bring to the table? I'm pretty good mentally, just in that I think that I do a good job of getting the most out of myself. I'm a good iron player. I typically, greens and regulation, I tend to do pretty well in that stat. And then I'm a good putter. I'm a streaky putter. So when I feel like I get a good feel with the putter and, like the greens, I can tend to make a lot of putts, and that's important in our game. Like I said, being able to turn those really good weeks into top finishes and get lots of points is kind of the name of the game. So I think that's a valuable asset to have. Do you play during the off? Do you have an off season? I should say. Yeah, our season starts in January for the Korn Ferry in Bahamas, and we play out of the country to start the year, and kind of a little more spread out at the start of the year. And then once we get back into America in the summer, it's kind of a bit of a race there, playing a lot in the summer. But our season goes from January to middle of October. So, around Christmas and over the winter, we have some time off, and hopefully not too much time off, because if you're going to the PGA Tour, you have less time off, and that's kind of the plan.
Yeah, so if you continue on this trajectory, you'll be on the PGA Tour next year. Is that safe to say?
Yeah. But if the season were to end now, I would be on the PGA Tour next year. Yeah.
Wow. Have you qualified for the Canadian Open?
I've played the Canadian Open the last 4 years. Lucky enough to be on the national team, Golf Canada, and they get a few exemptions into the Canadian Open every year, and kind of go based off world ranking for selecting guys that aren't already in to give a chance to play and have some representation from Canadians in the Canadian Open. So I've been lucky enough to play the last 4 years.
What's that been like?
It's cool. It's one of those things where it's for the Canadians, it's a busy week because there's so many people there that and it's for a guy that doesn't play 25 events a year. It's an exciting week, but I sometimes do wish that I was just playing a regular tournament where I could just kind of go through my process. But that is the fun part of it, is it being an important week for us and it being a big week. You do learn, and the guys are great, but we play on a super competitive tour on the Corn Ferry where scores are always low. So I've always felt that if I play well at that level, that I do feel like I can compete. So it's nice to be able to see that and it not feel too overwhelming when you're there. You feel like if you played well, it would translate to a good finish. So that's been the nice part about it for me, is feeling, not too out of place when I'm there, and feeling like I can compete at that level.
Absolutely. Myles, listen, let's keep in touch. The best of luck on this, and let's hope that you stay in that top 20 and that we're talking to you from the PGA Tour next year, and look forward to it. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks, Todd.
Okay, pal. Take care. Myles Creighton. That's a fantastic story, folks. Nova Scotia golfer on the Corn Ferry Tour, just below the PGA Tour, and like I said, the top 20. He's 7th now, makes the PGA Tour. And let's keep our eye on him. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it very much. I'd like to thank Vanessa Van Den Ness as well on the other side of the glass of the control board, doing a fine job as always. We are back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. See you then.